Hey, what's up? Do you have a living trust or are you considering setting up a living trust? If so, in this video, I'm going to share with you one of the most critical provisions you should have in your trust to give you maximum asset protection. All right, let's get started. Okay, so here's the deal. When it comes to setting up a living trust, I've reviewed thousands of these over my career, and I often find that many of these trusts are missing something that I think is really important that you should have when you're creating a living trust to ensure that if something were to go wrong with your beneficiaries, that the estate that you leave them will not be left to creditors or ex-spouses. Now, what I'm referring to is setting up your living trust with a beneficial control trust provision in there. Now, it's quite simple to do if you know how to set these provisions up, but I find a lot of practitioners who set up living trusts do not do this. They oftentimes will set up their living trust so that when the individual passes away, of course, everything is going to go to their spouse. And then when their spouse passes away, it's automatically passed on to the beneficiaries. But if you put together your trust with a beneficiary control provision in there, you can ensure that all of your assets that you've acquired during your lifetime can be protected from your beneficiaries' future creditors. Now, what am I talking about here? Let me show you. So with a living trust, when you set up a living trust, here's your trust agreement. And what's going to happen when you pass away is that you're going to have named beneficiaries who will receive the assets that you have accumulated inside of your living trust. Now, do not make this mistake. And that mistake is that a lot of individuals that I've even talked to during my career, they'll tell me, oh, my kids are mature. I would like you to distribute the assets 50-50 to the two of these individuals upon our passing. Now, we can accomplish the same thing. We can distribute them the assets, but we can do it in a responsible way that provides asset protection. And the way we set this up is with a beneficiary control provision. And what it means is this, that when after you've passed on, you can name your beneficiaries, these individuals, as your trustees of your trust. However, serving as trustees, what they'll be allowed to do is distribute out assets to themselves on an as-needed basis. So what you put in there is a provision that all the assets are to be held in trust, and the assets will be distributed to the beneficiaries on a discretionary basis. Meaning this, that if this individual here needs some assets, well, then they could distribute assets to this beneficiary. This beneficiary could do the same thing. But as long as those assets remain inside of the trust, that trust is protected from their creditors. So if this beneficiary right here was involved in a divorce or they're involved in a lawsuit, someone suing them, and they obtain a judgment against them, well, obviously the last thing we'd want to do in that scenario is be distributing money to this beneficiary, which in turn would go to their creditor. And this is a mistake that happens in estates, is that when people pass away, they leave assets to their children, their beneficiaries, and if there's judgment creditors out there, they're able to swoop in and attach these assets. So what we'd like to do then is keep them protected, because when you pass away, this trust becomes irrevocable. That means creditors cannot penetrate the trust, pierce it, and get into those assets. Yes, your child, your beneficiary, they're entitled to those assets when they're distributed to them, but the creditor can't step in between them and say, all right, just start distributing the assets out. Now, if you like this type of provision and you want to incorporate it into your trust, I suggest you do the following as well, because we want to make sure that we're enhancing it, that we're getting the most out of this, and we don't have some crazy judge step up and say, well, you have control over the assets and you are the beneficiary, and despite what the trust says, we're going to allow the creditor to reach into your trust. Now, the way I prevent that from occurring is that I will often include a trust protector in my trust. So this is one way to do this. You put in place a trust protector, and the trust protector is an independent third party that you name who will sit there and basically oversee the trust and step in when they're needed. So if this beneficiary right here was involved in a scenario where they had a judgment against them and a creditor's bringing them back into court, and you're worried that this argument's going to be brought up, or that beneficiary could just step back, say, listen, I'm not going to serve during this time. I'm going to turn over that provision to my trust protector. So then the trust protector, who is an independent third party, will now step in and control the distributions to this beneficiary. So we're defeating the creditor's argument that they might be making that, hey, it's you have access to these assets, so now I can reach them. Now that's one way to do it. A second way to set up this type of beneficiary controlled trust is to create trustees that have different powers under the trust agreement. So what we'll often do in those situations is we'll have a trustee here This will be a distribution trustee. Now, the distribution trustee is someone, of course, who is independent. So it's separate from the other. It's not the beneficiaries. They're not going to be the distribution trustee. We're going to name a third party as our distribution trustee. And if you're wondering who could be the trust protector, who could be a distribution trustee, obviously what you would like to do is name someone that you trust. It could be a relative, could be a close friend, it could be an attorney. Hey, another way for attorneys to make money. But just someone that's other than the beneficiary. Definitely wouldn't want to name the beneficiary spouse or child because they're just too close. So you would name a distribution trustee who would handle any money that's going to be distributed out of the trust. But one of the concerns that we always have is that I don't want that distribution trustee managing the trust assets because those belong to the beneficiaries. We want them to have them. So we then will set it up so that the beneficiaries here are the investment trustees. So as the investment trustee, the beneficiaries decide how the assets get invested. So they'll work hand in hand with the distribution trustee and basically like, hey, Fred, it'd be nice if I got a distribution this week. And so then Fred would then turn around and issue them a distribution and they would receive funds that way. So this is obviously a great way to set up your trust if you want to make sure there's some checks and balances there. So if creditors or, particularly ex-spouses, this is an area that, we've seen individuals going through divorce and they've lost serious amounts of money that they've inherited as a result of an ex-spouse reaching in and getting after these trust assets. It's unfortunate because the law used to be that assets that you inherited remained separate property and retained that character. But I think a lot of the legal system has amnesia and they forget what the longstanding law used to be and they're free to fashion what remedies they like now. And so what I prefer to do then is ensure that we're protecting those assets so that the only time you're taking money out is when you need it and you keep it locked up in this trust and it can then be held for multiple generations as well. So if I had a couple of beneficiaries and I created this beneficiary controlled trust, my instructions to them would be take out what you want while you're alive, leave everything else in there. There's no need to put it in your own name. And then when you pass, those same assets will be then available to your beneficiaries and we can perpetuate this. This is one of the best forms of asset protection you can provide to your beneficiaries through your estate plan is by setting up your living trust with these beneficiary control provisions. Listen, if you'd like to learn more about how to do this, I would encourage you to click on the link in the show notes below where you can set up a free strategy session with someone in my office and we'll walk you through this process on how to set up a trust. Maybe you already have a living trust that makes an outright distribution to your beneficiaries. And after watching this video, you're thinking, hey, I want to put some asset protection in place for them when I'm no longer here. Well, we can restate your trust, change it, and add in a lot of these provisions that I just went through to ensure that everything you've been building up during your lifetime remains protected for multiple generations.